Hey, welcome to the second video in the series on how to trans. So in this video, we'll be talking about some transing tips and some tips on how to trans during online classes. By the way, I cannot show you a real trans because the information there was only for our use. So I will be showing you a fake trans that I made up and with my own information. First two parts is just some general tips from Transcom that I just copy-pasted. So I'll just mention the ones that I don't go into depth in my own transing tip. One of them is to always make sure to have explanations to your review question, because sometimes people wouldn't understand why the answer is that, because sometimes it's hard to locate where that information was in the trans. It's just so much easier to have the information already there with the correct answer. Next one is using different types of bullets. So for our batch, we had bullets for information that was listed from the book or from the previous trans or from the PowerPoint but wasn't mentioned in depth by the lecturer. So these are just like handy bullet points for information that you don't know if it's gonna come up. It might come up, but it's best to notify the reader that it's not actually from the lecture but from the book or from the previous trans. And one last one, which is still like, people still forget to do this, always italicize the scientific name. Even I forgot that a few times. I'm not perfect. Okay, so these next tips, there's gonna be 12. They're just some stuff that I learned throughout YL 5 and YL 6. So I did not come up with all of these tips. So some of these things I did come up with. Some of them I noticed from the trances that I liked, and then I copied them, so credits to them. And some of these things my TG does. I didn't tell them to do it, but I noticed they do it and I loved it. So number one, we're going back to section summaries. So what are section summaries? We and a lot of trans groups make section summaries because everybody learns differently. So some people, they like to read the book, they like to read the lectures in a trans format to understand everything better. And some people like me, we're visual learners. So we like everything in a concise little box. So that's why when we make transes, we make sure to have section summaries and agree on the information that's supposed to be in a section summary before we even start transes. So where are these things helpful? So they're helpful especially in micro, patho, pharma. Those are the kinds of subjects where there's kind of a structure to everything. So throughout the trans, there's always going to be some information that's constant for each section. So for example, in micro transes, it's gonna be divided depending on the organism. So of course, each organism will have its scientific name, it will have the clinical relevance, any pharma that you need to know, the life cycle. So all of those things will be constant throughout all of those organisms. And in each section, you can just sum it up pretty easily into a tiny box. And then in the end, these tiny boxes, they will become the master table at the end where you can see all of the information in a concise format. And it's very pretty every time. For YL5 lectures, since they weren't as rigid as pharma or patho, usually we would have some short summaries for very hard sections. So if a certain process can be dumbed down into a few sentences or a few steps, that's where we put it. And that's also where we put those weird analogies we make so that we can memorize them easier. Also, let's be real, nobody read the quick reviews in YL5, but in YL6, they were the holy grail, for real. So tip number 2, making reminders. We and some other TGs started doing this because there were some important notes that the lecturer gave that weren't necessarily related to the lecture, but they were about the lecture. So for example, the lecturer would say, okay, these are this, and this, these are the topics that are gonna come out in the exam. Or this part, we're gonna talk about it, but it's not gonna be part of the exam. It's just a nice to know. Also important for things like, this lecture is heavily based on this book. For example, for a patho lecture, it's very heavily based on Robbins. So it's a good thing to note that, especially for the reader, and especially if the reader was not in class that day. So it's just kind of a little note for them, just in case they weren't there to hear it during class. I know it's a bit utilitarian, most of these tips will be, but during YL6, it became one of the things that were really important to know for the exam. So while 6 is really hard, we tried our best to make everything easier for each other. The formatting for these kinds of notes can be any way you want. It can be like this, it can be like this. It's up to you, depending on how important you think the note is or how much attention you think the note should have. Tip number 3, the need to knows. So similar to reminders, these are the things that everybody needs to know for the exam. There are a few ways on how to highlight those information. One of them could be putting it in bold font. Another could be adding a bracket exclamation point. One of them could be adding a whole need to know box. Usually I add these kinds of boxes when the lecturer literally says, this is what I'm gonna ask in the exam. But also don't trust the lecturers when they say that, because sometimes they just don't do that. So always study everything anyway. Tips on how to know when to use a bracket. Usually this is information that the lecturer said more than once. Another sign that the information is important is if in their PowerPoint, the information is also in bold or in different color. Or if there's a diagram or photo just to explain it. Okay, so for example, if the lecturer says, okay, Burkitt's lymphoma looks like they have a starry sky appearance, and then there's a picture, and then your lecturer is encircling the starry sky appearance in the video or in the PowerPoint they have. So you'll think, maybe this starry sky appearance is gonna come up in the exam one way or another. So yeah, that is basically like one of the telltale signs that information is gonna be very important. Okay, tip number 4, add context with quotes. So sometimes our docs like to cuento about their clinical experience, and this is going to be very important in understanding and contextualizing what the lecturer is actually talking about. Because sometimes there's information that will just go like, it's just like, what are you saying? This is too technical for me. So the lecturers are gonna kind of dumb it down with a cuento, and that's how you'll understand what they're talking about. So yeah, if that information is gonna help the reader understand a very technical topic, then go ahead, add it using a quotation box and make the person feel like they're in the lecture. Tip number 5, looks are important. Okay, so getting your train of thought derailed sucks. So why would you do that to your own tran? So if at the end of the page a new section starts, just go, hit the enter button a few times, start it up at the top of the page, or go ahead and from the bottom of the page, it'll start in the new page. I don't know, maybe if it's just me, I like it when I'm reading something, it just goes straight, and I don't have to go to the next page. And also remember that some of your batchmates will be printing your transes. So if there's information in one page that continues on to the next one, it's just hard to just keep on. But make sure to do this last, because sometimes tiny changes in pictures or some changes in your bullet points, they can totally change everything. So do this last. Do the formatting last always. In tangent with that is do not cut the table. Again, it's just easier to see all the information flow in one go, Also, especially for those who print transes, they don't want to go keep on. They don't want to keep on Okay, here is a simple one, but an important. Tip number 7, don't forget to renumber your lists. I know this is like a basic how-to from Transcom, but sometimes people still forget. So, if you notice you made a new numbered list and then it starts at a weird number, not number 1, just do a little right click, restart at number 1. That's it. You did it.
You're chancing God.
We're moving on to tip number 8. Which is don't waste space. Yes, it's counterintuitive to what I just said to hit the enter button a lot, but you should still know when to not waste space. This means changing the size of the pictures if they're too big and you don't need them to be too big. For tables, adjusting the width of the cells or adjusting the alignment of the text, adding a picture to take up space, anything. Be creative with how you make your master tables. Sometimes you can't really categorize things the way I mentioned a while ago in section summaries, but some trans groups have found a way to make master tables out of things that don't have structure. And that's something I learned later on in YL6, but it is a beautiful thing to learn. Obviously, I can't show you what I'm talking about, but if you're incoming YL6, you're gonna find out what these master tables look like pretty soon. Tip number 9 is take the review questions very seriously. Maybe this is just me because I was the review question head for YL6, but it really meant a lot to me to have review questions that were on topic. So as much as we want our trances to be fun, we don't want to sacrifice the learning for the fun. It's really nice when a question has a balance of funny and seriousness. This means that in our trans group, we never had a question that had a choice of I don't know or ewan ko or anything, because that's just kind of like, what's the point? That kind of choice is not gonna come up in the exam. Might as well just use a wrong answer than a jokey answer. But of course, this is all up to you. It depends on your trans group. Maybe it's too serious for you. Whatever. It's up to you. And another thing that was brand new in YL6 was matching type questions, which I hate and loved at the same time, because it really tests how much you know about the pathologies or the drugs in pharma. So basically, for example, in pharma, you'll just match the mode of action to the drug. And man, I got so many things wrong. But it was so important for me to answer those review questions because they came out in the exam. On to almost the last. Tip number 10, which is read and reread the trans. Basically, read it as you who's transing it, and then read it as you, as the student, doing it as a first read. So when I'm checking our trans, this is my mantra. If this was my first read right now, am I understanding the trans? If not, what can I do to make it easier for me to understand it? And if you're not the TP, you're just a member of the trans group, then read your part and see, if I read this on my own, would I understand what I just wrote? If not, then how can you make it easier? Which brings us to tip number 11, which is put it in your own words. So I know this is a big case of what the COA called to be the blind leading the blind, but sometimes that's just how it is. You know, when it's Sunday night and you still can't understand the topic, or you still can't understand the mode of action or the physio process, you just have to make something up in your brain. You just have to make something stupid so that you can remember it for the exam. And to help out your batchmates, if you think that's gonna happen, then do it for them. Why not? Sometimes you just have to make something up and pretend you're explaining it to your seatmate so that it's easier to understand. This means like stupid mnemonics, weird analogies, whatever works for you, whatever you think will work for other people. So we had one renal trans that had a little nice to know about a certain surgery procedure. I think it was ureteral re-implant tunnel. Okay, yeah, I read that. It was pretty complicated. Something about wait a minute. It was something about vesicoureteral reflux. So you know, I was reading the trans at like 3 a.m. and I was like, what is this procedure? I cannot understand it. I looked it up on the internet. I tried to figure it out, and I made my own weird analogy. Something about okay, I'll read it right now. Think of your ureter as a straw. When you suck on the straw, liquid goes up. When there is vesicoureteral reflux, your urine gets sucked up to the ureter and back into your kidneys. But if you clamp the straw with your fingers, even if you suck on the straw, the liquid won't go up. In the surgery, the ureter is clamped by the bladder wall, so the urine won't get sucked up anymore. So that was my stupid analogy with the straw and the ureter. And you know what? It came up in the exam. I remember because I made a little note in my own trans that it actually came out in the exam. So yeah. So that's, I don't know if that helped anybody. That helped me. I got the question right. So
Nice.
okay, moving on now to our last tip, which is the most Athenaeum tip that I will ever give you. And it's to remember why you're transing. So all these tips, they won't matter if you think transing is a chore. Yeah, okay, it sucks balls when you have to stay up and trans, especially if you're the trans police and you have to stay up and check everything. But remember that your batchmates are gonna use this trans and rely on this trans to pass the next exam. We're all aiming for the same goal here. Nobody's going to be less of a doctor if somebody gets a higher grade. So why not make it so much easier for your batchmates to get to that goal together? I know it's super cliche, super cliche and Athenian to say remember your why, but it's just really important, you know? And if the answer to why you're making a trans is just because you're expected to make the trans, then transing will be the bane of your med school life. It is gonna be the worst chore after studying. Personally, I'm not the type of person to volunteer for anything. I don't volunteer for student council things. I don't volunteer for transcom things. Sorry. But when it comes to ACAD stuff, that is something I'm willing to volunteer for anytime, except this time. I am sorry, Marian. So in my mind, making a very nice trans, making a trans that's easy to understand, that is me doing my part in my batch to help us all graduate together. So yeah, okay, the sappy stuff is over. Yeah. We're Athenians. We get it. We're annoying. But now there's an extra thing that we have to address, which is COVID. So how do you trans during COVID, during online classes? What do we do? So number one, have no fear. It will probably mostly be the same, and you will probably have more time actually to make your trans. Since everything's asynchronous, you'll probably have more time to refine your trans, to do whatever, and it may be easier for you. Granted, there was a learning curve for everyone last semester. We were all still in the dark on how to study and how to give out the lectures online. But don't worry, our YL coordinators and our module coordinators, they have assured us that during this break, they have been learning so many different ways to dish out all the lectures and all the modules for the next semester and for the next year. So have faith, and when you're in trouble, never hesitate to ask your module coordinator, your YL coordinator, or even your ates and kuyas and the upper batches, because we will always be there for you. But number two, troubleshooting, just in case this happens to you. So imagine the scenario. You got assigned to trans a lecture and it's just a PowerPoint presentation. There's no audio, there's no video, there's no supplements, and there's no handout. So what do you do? Or even worse, if all of the above applies and the PowerPoint relies heavily on what the lecturer would have said if we were in an on-site class, that's okay. Number one, check the PowerPoint if there are any references listed. If there are, use that book, use that source, and supplement that PowerPoint with that information. Always remember, use the correct bullet points and make note boxes if you have to. If there's no references listed, you can try reaching out to the lecturer or to the module coordinator, and they will help you out. They will probably give you the list of references. If they mention there is no one specific reference for it, or the lecturer relies a lot on the clinical experience of that lecturer, still reach out to that lecturer. They will always be happy to help. So you can always check with online resources, check with books that you already have. For sure, the upper batches will be giving you the PDF copies of the books for your reference. Another thing you can do is to check with last year's trans. If it's more or less the same, you can always use it as a reference, but make sure to check for any errata and also to use the correct bullet points or make notes that certain information came from previous year's trans. So this is very helpful in those lectures now where the lecture depends a lot on what the lecturer would have said on site. As a last note, we're all still adjusting to online learning. There's still a lot of things that we need to learn. Guys, always have patience with your YLCs and MC and lecturers. They will always be there to help you, and do not be shy to ask them for help. When you do ask them for help, always remember to be courteous and respectful in emails, in Facebook chats, in text messages, whatever. Always be courteous to your admins. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you learned one thing, please share it, and maybe it can help somebody else learn how to trans. And don't worry, if you like this video, I transed it. It's available over here.